You know the scene, right? A speeding train, a determined villain, a super high-stakes standoff. It's a classic movie trope. But what happens when it's not a movie? Well, the real history of train hijackings is actually way more surprising, and it's a story that you probably haven't heard. So, let me ask you a question. When you hear the word hijacking, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's probably airplanes. But what about trains? How often do you think these things actually happen? Well, the answer might surprise you. They are incredibly rare, like way, way rarer than plane hijackings. And that's exactly what makes each one so intense and such a fascinating window into how a crisis can unfold. And that gets us to the big question, doesn't it? When the unthinkable does happen, what is it that decides how the story ends? What pushes one crisis towards violence and another towards a peaceful resolution? Let's dive into a few key historical events and see what we can find out. Okay, first up, let's look at the most dramatic outcomes. We're going to explore two major incidents where the authorities decided that force was really the only option left on the table.
So we've got two situations here that on the surface couldn't be more different. On one hand, you've got this intense political standoff in the Netherlands. On the other, a desperate attempt to escape the Soviet Union. Their reasons were worlds apart, but their stories, they ended the exact same brutal way, with a military raid on the train.
Now, to really get this Dutch crisis, you have to know that it didn't just happen out of the blue. The hijackers, South Moluccan separatists, had actually done this before, just 2 years earlier, and people had died. So by 1977, when they seized another train, you can imagine the tension was already through the roof. After a grueling 20-day standoff, the government's patience just ran out. And this was the cost of that decision. 8 people died. The raid took out 6 of the hijackers, yes, but it also killed 2 of the hostages they were supposed to be saving. Just a brutal, tragic end to a long, painful siege. All right, now let's jump forward about a decade to the Soviet Union for a crisis with a totally different motive. This is Pasha Kuznetsov. He wasn't a political activist. He and his armed group just wanted one thing: to escape the USSR. And they saw that passenger train as their only ticket out. Their threat was crystal clear. They said they would blow the whole train up. Faced with that, Soviet authorities responded with, well, overwhelming force. So you see the pattern here, right? In both the Dutch case and this one, the answer was a raid. But did it have to be? The answer is no, not at all. So let's pivot and look at a completely different way to handle this. We're going to head over to India, where 2 major hijackings took a very different path, one that was all about negotiation, not force. Just look at this. We have 2 big hijackings in India. Both had similar political demands. They wanted prisoners freed. But check out the outcomes. In both cases, the crisis was resolved by talking, a negotiated surrender. No raid, no assault, everyone walked away safe. And let's be clear about that 2009 incident. This was not a small deal. We're talking about 500 armed rebels stopping a passenger train. Their demand was direct: release our arrested leader. This was a massive show of force. But now, compare that to what happened in 1991. This wasn't a rebel army. It was just one guy, Rakesh Singh. He claimed he had a bomb, and that was enough to stop the whole train. But here's the kicker. After they negotiated with him, he surrendered, and the bomb turned out to be a fake. It just goes to show you, the perceived threat isn't always the real threat. And this right here, this is what negotiation can achieve. In that 2009 hijacking with the 500 rebels, there were over 1,000 passengers on board. After just a few hours of talks, every single one of them was freed, totally unharmed. Now remember that other number we saw? 8 dead? Here, over 1,000 safe. The difference is just staggering. So, we've seen both sides of the coin here. Standoffs that end in bullets and standoffs that end with handshakes. Let's try to put it all together and figure out what we can really learn from these events. Why do they end so differently? It really seems to boil down to a few key things. First, you've got to ask, what's their motivation? Is it the political desperation of the Moluccans, a desperate escape attempt from the Soviet Union, or a specific negotiable demand, like in the cases from India? Then, how credible is the threat, and what's the scale? You handle one guy differently than you handle an army of 500 rebels. But Maybe the most critical factor of all is the government's response. For the Dutch, their painful history with the group probably hardened their position. For the Soviets, negotiation with enemies of the state was likely unthinkable. But in India, they had a long history of dealing with insurgencies, so negotiation was a familiar tool. That choice, to talk or to fight, is the pivot on which everything turns.
So, the violent standoff we always see in the movies? Turns out it's not the only story. If the real history of train hijackings teaches us anything, it's that negotiation can be an incredibly powerful tool, and it often leads to a much better outcome. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other hidden histories are out there just waiting to be uncovered that could completely change the way we see the world?